Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Alec, and I'm going to be here in the background to help answer any of your general or technical questions that you have. But before we get started, I'd like to go over a couple things that you'll have throughout today's session. There is no dial-in number for today's webinar, so please adjust your volume on your computer speakers or headphones accordingly. You can submit questions or any technical questions for me by clicking on the questions icon marked here by that top arrow. You can also download a PDF right now of the slide deck by clicking on the handout icon marked here by this bottom arrow. Today's webinar is being recorded. You're going to receive a link to the recording in a follow-up email. Please allow at least 2 business days before that information is sent. Along with that follow-up email, you will receive a link to the recording in that, and you will receive a link to the slides and your HRCI and SHRM certification codes for today's event. All right, so with us today we have Arthur Harrington, Director of Education at Imprivata. Arthur is a healthcare IT executive with 25 years of progressive leadership in architecting education strategies on a global level for innovative and growth-oriented companies. He has used his combination of education and business acumen to transform training and education departments from afterthoughts to integral components of customer and employee success. So it is our pleasure to have Arthur with us. So without any further delay, Arthur, let's get started.
Thank you very much, Alec. I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to join me today. I am joining you from historic Lexington, Massachusetts. And what I'd like to do is a quick overview of today's presentation. I'll tell you a little bit about where I work, who I am, what my team does, and the story of our LMS implementation and eventual re-implementation. Talk to you a little bit about the outcomes, the results of our re-implementation, and then talk a bit about what's next. Where do we go from here and into the future with our LMS? So I work at a company called Imprivata. It's a healthcare IT security software company. If you ask the marketing team, they will say that Imprivata is enabling healthcare to access, communicate, and transact patient information securely and conveniently. The easiest way to explain what Imprivata does is, you know those badges that everyone has to get into the office or enter various doors and so forth? What we do is we program those badges so that doctors, nurses, other healthcare professionals can access computers. So instead of having to remember all the passwords for their computers, they just tap their badge on the computer, logs them in, opens up all their applications, logs them into all of those applications, tap it again, and it logs you out. We also have other software around fingerprint identification, patient identification. But today's presentation isn't about Imprivata. It's not about a specific learning management system, but it's really a story of how we implemented a learning management system, weren't seeing the results we expected, and then re-implemented it and improved the results of where we were. I've been here at the company for 2 years, actually 2 years, July. The original system was implemented 3 years ago, so some of this is historic information. So a little bit about who I am. So I'm a dad, I'm a golfer, I'm a storyteller. The picture there is lovely Pebble Beach out in Monterey Peninsula, California, the most expensive round of golf I've ever played in my life. I didn't shoot well, but I certainly enjoyed the view. I'm a real training advocate. I mean, my career actually started as an instructional designer, a trainer. I worked at Mass General Hospital in Boston, teaching doctors how to read x-rays online. And one of the things that I've learned through my training career is you don't get return on investment from buying software. I mean, you really get the return on investment from people using that software effectively. And that's where training and education comes in for whether it's customer education or employee education. So I'm really an advocate for training. As far as the business side, so the industry that I'm in, I do part customer training, part partner training, and also employee training and education. So when you start to talk about the business of training, you know, when I got my degree in instructional design and education, I was talking about, you know, needs analysis and Kirkpatrick models of evaluation and Bloom's taxonomy and all this training lingo. And what I realized was that everyone else was speaking business language. So I went back to school, got an MBA, so I was able to speak their language and really understand what are their motivations and, you know, how do I deliver the best type of training while still making money for an organization. I'm also a problem solver. I mean, the last few positions that I had, I either came in and built a training department from scratch, or implemented the last position implemented a global learning management system, or in this case or this organization sort of rebuild a training organization that already existed. So this is who I am. If you want to connect, I'm out on LinkedIn. You should be able to find me pretty easily. And of course, someday when I grow up, I'd like to be a chief learning officer. Let me tell you a little bit about what my team does. So my team is made up of instructional designers, e-learning content developers, technical trainers, and what we do is design, develop, and deliver education internally as well as for our customers and partners. Our team delivers technical training, so our typical training that we deliver to a customer is a week-long training. It's an admin level certification. So folks go through 4 days of training on the back end of our systems, and then they spend the last day, about half of that day, a few hours, completing a certification exam. So we also, our team manages our Improvada Learning Center, which is our LMS. And you know, we also are a cost center. Right, so we did about $1 million worth of training last year. So because we are a cost center, you know, I also have to keep on top of things like the top line, the bottom line, margins, so forth. So as I mentioned before, training not only has to be great, it also has to be cost effective. So we come to our first polling question to make sure people are paying attention. So I just want to get a feel for the audience out there and where you guys are on your LMS journey. So do you have a functioning LMS, you're implementing one now, you're thinking about it, or you don't have one? So I'm just going to give Alec a minute or so here not a minute, 30 seconds or so we can see the results of the poll. Okay, so about 72% have a functioning LMS. About 7% are implementing one now, 16% thinking about it, and 5% don't have one just yet. Okay, so nearly 3/4 of folks have a functioning LMS. And that's good because I imagine that you guys may have or may in the future run into some of the issues that we ran into. So let me tell you a story. Okay, so setting the stage. 3 years ago, so just 3 years ago, I was not here yet, but this is not a case of who did what, when, and where, but I just want to set the stage of where this company was 3 years ago as far as the LMS. So a lot of change happening. A growing healthcare IT security company. You know, literally this was a startup with 5 people at one point. Had grown up to a couple of hundred people. 3 years ago it was probably at around 350 people. Now we're up probably 500 to 600 people. The company had recently gone public, right? So it was a private company. When you go public, there's a lot of rules, regulations, changes, you know, lawyers, accountants, all kinds of folks involved. Also, there was one main product at that time, but the company was just about to roll out 3 new products. The only training available was instructor-led training. And typically it was an instructor flying to a customer site. Typically that would be a hospital, and delivering training at the customer site. Now at this time, there were no true instructional designers on the team yet. So the training was designed by implementation folks, project managers, implementation engineers, other folks who may have known the products inside and out, but didn't really know the skill of building training and education. So there's really no true instructional design behind it, from my perspective. And so essentially it was PowerPoint presentations. So why even implement an LMS, right? So companies doing well, folks are going out on the road, doing training at customer sites. Customers are relatively happy with that. Well, why implement an LMS? Now one obvious thing that isn't on the slide here is just scalability, right? As the number of customers grow, it's more and more difficult to be able to have folks out there in the field, because with training there's a lot of ups and downs, right? You have busy times and then you have slow times, and if you have to cover all of, you know, build up your staff to cover all of the high times, then you may end up with, you know, too many folks. So some of the reasons here for implementing an LMS were to develop a learning environment for employees. Employees essentially had an onboarding program and some handouts, and that was it. As far as the scalability, the manual labor around scheduling training and getting resources there and tracking it all was getting, it was done in Excel spreadsheets, but it was getting a little bit out of hand. Some customers can't fly or buy, so they don't really have a lot of money to spend, especially smaller customers, and so they can't fly to our corporate offices for training, and they have a hard time really paying for training to have us come there. And there were also a couple other things. One was creating new revenue. You know, as I mentioned, part of what we do is bring in the money. So if we had new e-learning offerings, well, we could sell those. People would buy those. And then also recurring revenue. So the idea was that the LMS subscription would be sold to an organization, and it would expire after a year, and then they would renew. So that renewal would be recurring revenue that we could see year after year. So some of these may be specific to our organization, but overall, these are somewhat generic reasons why you may implement an LMS. So the decision was made, okay, we're getting a learning management system. And there were really 2 parts of that. There's the business plan, and then there's the LMS implementation plan. So the business plan is really around kind of the money part of it and the business of how do we actually sell this and so forth in the organization. And the LMS implementation plan is around, well, how do we actually roll this out? How do we do this? So, the business plan. The first part of the business plan was really to determine the return on investment, right? So we're going to hire work with a vendor. We're going to purchase services from them. We're going to purchase licenses for them. We need to figure out how many licenses do we think we need over the next year and going forward. How long of a contract do we sign? How much do we charge for access to the learning management system? Also, and then create the training offerings, right? So we said earlier that, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could sell training offerings to folks, right? We can sell them just standalone e-learning, that would bring in revenue. So we needed to actually build out those offerings. And by building the offerings, we needed to design kind of what it is, really, lay out what the training product is, build out SKUs, build out prices and price lists, and get it all into our system so that sales is able to actually sell the training. So, which leads me to sales. So communicate to sales. It was really vital for the sales department to understand what these new training products were, really for them to be able to describe what they are, help the customer understand why they should buy it. And I mentioned that we brought in about $1 million, or delivered about $1 million worth of training last year. On an average deal, training is probably about 3 to 5% of the deal, depending on the size of the deal. So to most of the salespeople, training wasn't, I wouldn't say training's not a big deal to them, but it was not as important as it was to my team, who are a group of, training aficionados. So communicate to sales, roll it out at the annual company meeting. So at the annual company meeting, everyone is there. Imprivata is a global company, so we would fly everyone in. It's 3 days, typically in Boston, lots of presentations, and one of those would be, hey, we've got this new learning center, this is what it is, this is how you sell it, rah, rah, rah. And then, of course, watch the money flow in, because after all, that's what we're trying to do here, to make some money. So that was the kind of the business plan, the nuts and bolts around how do we get this all set up within our financial systems and sell it. The LMS plan is really about how do we select a vendor and build it all out and get it up and running and make it work. As far as selecting a vendor, we were looking for someone that was relatively inexpensive and could implement quickly. And so we did find a vendor, looked at a few different vendors and selected one. The next step, and once again, I wasn't here for this part of it, but negotiate, negotiate, negotiate. Apparently our CIO got involved and really loved to negotiate. So a lot of negotiation happening. And then really the nuts and bolts was to work with the vendor to figure out, okay, how does your system work? How do our current processes work? And how do we sort of meld them together into something that's going to work for us? Part of that involved a couple of folks from the organization flying out to California and sitting through a week-long training on the kind of the admin side of the learning management system, which, they reported that was good training. What we deliver, probably 80% of what we're doing is customer-facing training. So it's not within our organization, it's outside of our organization. And a lot of learning management systems are built around kind of the HR training world, if you will, where folks are, departments and they're internal. And so we had to figure out, well, how do we don't really use departments, we use customer name. So there was a lot of that around how do we actually set up the learning management system, get content in there, and make it work. So if you have an LMS, you need to have LMS content. Over 50 online learning modules were built in a hurry. We had hired some content developers who came in and used Camtasia to create online learning modules. And although technically they are online learning modules, these were really, if you would, sort of talking slide decks. So they did technically meet the need of being online learning, and they had good content in there, but they were not very interactive. And once again, rollout at the annual company meeting. This is similar to rolling it out to sales. At the company meeting was rolled out corporate-wide to let folks know that this is available for employees as well. And then the the big part of the plan is, okay, let's flip the switch and make it work. So another poll. How long do you think it takes, or should it take, to effectively implement a learning management system? And the results are rolling in. Okay, so 3% say 1 to 3 months, and about a third, and a third say 3 to 6 months, 6 to 12 months, and more than a year. And the truth is, these are all correct answers, because it really depends on the size of what you're doing. At my last position, we were implementing, a global LMS across a huge organization, and it was about 18 months to get that done. Here, the system was implemented in about 9 hectic months. From what I've heard, there were a lot of long hours, long phone calls and meetings around getting things up and running. Quick decisions were being made. Consultants were hired to create some of the e-learning modules, as I mentioned. There were also presentations going on to sales and other folks. But it was really pushed through in 9 months, which could be good, or it could be bad, depending on how things work out. So I'm not old enough to have ever seen an Edsel. Well, I wouldn't say that, but this is an Edsel. So it looks good, but people are not really buying it, right? The plans were executed, but we're not seeing expected outcomes. I recently listened to an audio book, and one of the examples they had was the Edsel, where all along the way, all these decisions were made that everyone agreed with, and that this car should, be a blockbuster. But once it hit the market, folks didn't buy it. And that is similar to what happened here. So, and this coincidentally, well, not so coincidentally, but this is where I was brought in around this time. So things had, the LMS had been implemented, it was about 9 to 12 months later. I was brought in to try to help figure out, how do we fix this, or what's wrong? Why isn't it really working? It's a beautiful automobile, but no one seems to be buying it. And I'll go into a little bit of detail on each of these, but essentially the symptoms were that customers are not buying the LMS option, employees are not using it, it doesn't really work the way we had expected, it's actually more work, and you know what? The education team is not really happy. So I'll go into each one of these and tell you a little bit more about them. So customers are not buying the LMS option. So the learning management system option was actually sold as an optional add-on. So a customer would be sold, let's use that full week training, for example. They would be sold the full week training, which is on site, up to 8 people for X price. Then on top of that, they would get 8 seats in the LMS at $500 a piece. So in many cases, customers said, well, do I really need that? And you know, to a salesperson, that's a small bit of the pie. They don't want to hold up a, you know, a $400,000 deal for a couple of $1,000s in training. So they would just say, you know what, you don't really need that. As I mentioned, the content was not very engaging. It was good. I mean, if you went through it and you absorbed it, you learned the information. But it wasn't, you know, scenario based and interactive, and it, as I mentioned, it was sort of PowerPoint presentations with a voiceover. The material is also redundant, so it's the same material that gets covered in class in the instructor-led training. It's also, a lot of the material came directly from the help system. So you know, it's, as I mentioned, not engaging, redundant. The offerings are confusing. So I mentioned that, you know, this particular offering has 8 classroom seats in it, but you only got 5 LMS seats in it. And that was confusing to me from the beginning, very confusing to sales, confusing to the project manager, confusing to the customer, saying, well, why do I pick 5 people out of the 8? Just a little bit of background. What I found around that is when you add something to an item that you're selling, you cannot increase the price by more than 15% year over year, or something to that effect. So that's why it was only 5 seats. Didn't make a lot of sense to anyone except for apparently an accountant and a lawyer up on the 3rd floor. Anyway, and sales really didn't understand the value. Although they sat through presentations and they maybe nodded their head, they really didn't understand the value of a subscription in the learning management system, where, you know, not only do you have access to this content pre-training, during training, but for, you know, a year after you complete your classroom training. So, so this is why customers were not buying the Edsel, I mean the LMS. It wasn't effectively marketed to employees. So although we're focused a lot on the customer side of it, this also is a learning management system for employees. However, it was only used for compliance training, and there was a set of, if you will, canned e-learning content that we purchased with the system. So not effectively marketed to employees, wasn't really rolled out well to employees. It didn't work as expected. So one would expect that if you implement a learning management system, things would actually get easier. But we actually had to have a full-time employee to administer the learning management system. There was also no integration with our various systems. So there are 5 different systems that our admin would have to touch in order to get someone set up, either set up or track or schedule or whatever in the system. You know, so we had, for example, ADP is the HR system that could feed in all employee information. We have another tool that's the scheduling tool so that project managers can schedule trainers to get out on site. We have a support portal where folks would log in through the support portal and single sign-on into the learning management system. And then we had our CRM system, Salesforce, which is where all the data lived that we needed it fed into. Also, somewhere over time, the relationship with the vendor had soured a bit. So, what do? Here is another poll, and if you've been paying attention and read up front, I think you'll know where we went. But if you were I, what would you do if you came into this organization and you see where things are? Yeah. So results are coming in. I love that 2% of you would like to just put your head in the sand, pretend it didn't happen, or go with the MOOC. A full quarter of folks say, get a new LMS vendor. And 70% admit there is a problem. So back to our, so most people said admit there is a problem, right? And that's, I mean, ultimately what we did, because the other options, so the get an LMS vendor, right? So at first, that's what I thought. So, oh, we can't work with these people. This system doesn't work. Let's get a new vendor. But what we did was we really looked at things objectively and realistically without assigning blame, because there were a lot of people involved, a lot of decisions made along the way that impacted the final outcome. And the last thing I wanted to do was say, hey, well, look, you set it up this way, and you did this, and you negotiated this deal, and look at where you got us. And so after looking at things objectively, realistically, without assigning blame, we realized that the best thing to do at this point is admit a problem, right? Admit that there's a problem. I went and sat down with some senior folks and I said, hey, look, I know a lot of time, effort, money was put into implementing this LMS, and this is what I found. And basically outlined some of, some of the, I didn't show them a picture of an Edsel, but outlined some of those issues and said, hey, what I would propose is that we basically start over and let's redeploy our training offerings and redeploy the learning management system. So that's what we did, how we fixed it. Now, fixing the problem was something that is not a one-time, okay, let's tackle this and fix everything, and it's 2 months and everything's done. What we did is we started to prioritize stuff, go for the low-hanging fruit that we could just fix, and then some other things kind of stretched out over time. And as you'll see, there are some things now, although we started fixing things a full year ago, there are some things that we're still working on now, because although they were high priority, they were bigger projects than we could tackle at the time. So I'll go through each one of these, but what we did was rebuild the relationship with the vendor, reduced the manual work using some existing functionality, redesigned all the offerings, created some new ones, and most importantly here was the communicate piece. So rebuilding the relationship with the vendor. My first call with our account rep, she actually said to me, you nickeled and dimed us to death, and this is what you get. And I almost dropped the phone. But I let her know, hey, well, we've got some new folks here. We realized that there were, some issues in the past, and, not technical issues. I think they were more, how do I say, not personality, but interaction issues with some of the folks on both sides. This wasn't a us or them. It was both sides. So so we agreed to shake hands and make up and plan for the future. And coincidentally, we did have our contract expiring within a few months. So, I was at the point of, hey, if you don't want to shake hands and make up, if you're going to take your ball and go home, we'll look for someone else. But we were able to make up and make things work. Another thing that we did was really reviewed the contract with the vendor, because as I looked through the contract, I found things, for example, integration with WebEx for instructor-led online training. I said, oh, that's wonderful. Where do I find that? Well, we don't have that. Why don't we have that? We never implemented it. Why didn't we implement it? I don't know. So I spoke to the vendor, and they said, yeah, you did pay for that, but you never implemented it. I said, oh, great. Well, I'd like to implement it now. And they said, no, read your contract. You had 1 year to implement those services. You haven't. It's too late. And there were some other things as well that, there were some things we got that we didn't pay for, honestly. And there were some things that we really need that we did pay for, but we let expire. So it was a little bit of our fault as well. But once again, at that point, we decided, all right, let's move forward. Let's sort of forget the past and let's move forward. So we did a good job of rebuilding the relationship with the vendor. I've actually since then gone to a couple of their user group events in the Boston area and really have learned a lot. And I think we've really shared a lot with them as well. Reduce manual work using existing functionality. So as we dug into the learning management system, there were things that were just a real pain to do. I'll use an example here, enrolling someone. Enrolling someone in a class and assigning the content in the exam took about 15 minutes. So, that doesn't seem bad, but we would get, 8 at a time. All right, so that's now 2 hours that someone has to spend enrolling folks, and it's all manual work. So if you forget one checkbox, one click here, one, button there, you can really mess up everything. We found on our own by digging in and saying, hey, it should be able to do this, and testing and trying, and we're just beginning to make up with our vendor here, so they did start to help out a little bit and so forth. We're able to create curricula. So instead of assigning individual, remember I said that we created about 50 individual classes, modules, those were being assigned bit by bit. What we found was that you can just build a curriculum, and assign that to folks. Bulk enrollment, what bulk enrollment allows you to do is import a spreadsheet. Import a spreadsheet, first name, last name, email address, company name, LMS access start date, end date, and there was a field for curricula. So you could actually assign the curricula there. Dynamic content assignment, that was where you could assign it. You create a name saying, on-site 5-day class, and you put that in, it automatically assigns it. And then also leveraging the exam engine. So we have, we do a certification program, and we were manually kind of assigning exam questions. It was a lot of work. The other thing we did was there were actually paper forms that people were filling out. Got rid of that, and we stopped printing books. We were spending $30,000 a year printing 250-page documents that we would hand out to people who attended the training. And we do this training in our corporate offices as well as at the customer site. And I went into the class one day, and on the last day I said, hey, how many of you are taking your book home? 2 out of 10 people were keeping their books. So after that, I just said, you know what? We're not printing anymore. Saves trees and money. Redesign all of the training offerings. So what we did was really took all the training we're delivering and figured out, forget what we are delivering, what should we be delivering? And so the whole training team, we got together for a couple of days, whiteboards, lots of coffee and food, and just went through what's working, what isn't. And so one example is we had this prerequisite training, and it was about 30 training modules that we expected people to go through before they attended training, before they attended the classroom training. 27% of people who had been assigned to touched it. Only 10% of those 27% actually completed it. So folks were coming into class totally unprepared because they hadn't gone through the pre-learning. So we really made it blended training. So you now, for all of our classes, you get less than 1 hour of online required pre-work. Then you get your classroom training. It could be 2 days, 3 days, 5 days. And then you have access to the supplemental library of content for a year. So that was how we redesigned all of our training offerings. We also created some new ones. So online recertification. You've already been certified, you just want to re-up, you can do that totally online. A remote training offering for those real small customers who can't afford to have a week of training. They can't afford to have someone out of work for a week for training. And then also, while we were at it, fix the existing ones, these mismatched seats with the 8 seats and 5 LMS seats. And then communicate, right? So what we did was we rewrote very clear course descriptions. What's this class? Who is it for? How long is it? How do I get it? Redesigned our public-facing global websites. So if you go from improvada.com and you go to the education page, all of that has been redone. And also train the sales organization to help them understand it's no longer an add-on. This is part of the training. It comes with it, it's bundled. No, you can't break it out. No, you can't sell just one of these and one of those. It's all bundled together. We also built a interactive storyline training module, less than 5 minutes, that all the sales folks were assigned to go through. Had scenario-based knowledge checks. So based on the type of customer and what they were purchasing, what products, which training should you sell them. Also, we did job aids, we did multiple emails, presented at various meetings. So that's everything we did to fix things. So what difference did it make? And before I tell you what difference it made, it wasn't all rainbows and unicorns. It took, it's been 3 years since the original launch, 1 year since the relaunch. We ran into some technical issues where we had old quotes out there where we had quoted customers' pricing for the old offerings, but now we're selling new offerings. We also ran into the sales department kept selling the old offering. We had to literally pull it out of our quoting tool system so they couldn't sell it anymore. And then we had a big issue with price lists. So we've got multiple price lists based on region. And we found that all the Australia prices were too low and all the UK prices were too high because of a little formula in Excel that translated from dollars into Australian dollars and UK pounds. So it wasn't, wasn't all rosy, but we got through those issues. And it did make a big difference. So we increased our revenue by 20%. That was mostly through ensuring that all the seats were paid for, and our new offerings were a hit. People liked the recertification. We've sold a lot of the remote training for small customers. Redesigning our website has actually we've gotten a lot of folks come through our website and say, hey, I saw this training, I'm interested, how do I buy that? Reduced expenses, so the full-time employee that we had administering the system has moved on to a different position, and we were able to eliminate printing, so together that saved us about $100,000 a year. We reduced the training delivery lag time. Our training happens around implementation, and project managers and implementation engineers were having a hard time explaining to folks what the training was and why they needed it. So they pushed it off and pushed it off and pushed it off. Well, using good, better communication, we've been able to get that, cut down. In many cases, we're delivering it within 2 months. Some customers, it was out 10, 12 months. We've also eliminated the backlog. And now, remember I told you about 27% of people are accessing the pre-learning? Now we're up to 90%, and almost all of them completed because it is now part of their certification. If you don't complete that, you don't get certified. Okay, I think I've got 2 slides left for you here. Moving forward, so okay, we've gotten this far. What do we do from here? One of the things that we're doing is really expanding employee education. So recently we did a survey of employees to find out what training they think they need. Also, I've done several management interviews, sitting down with managers and finding out from them, what do you think your employees need? And we're starting to source some of that content. Also product training, right? So we're building all this product training for customers. Why in the world are we not sharing that with employees? So we've now included all of that in our employee portal. They're 2 separate portals, so it's now in the employee portal as well. We have a project going on right now where we are integrating with Salesforce. That's done. ADP is almost done, and WebEx will be done soon. So once again, we're working with the vendor, going back and saying, hey, look, we'll give you a little bit of money, you give us some expertise, let's get these things integrated like they should have been years ago. Most of the training that's being sold is being sold to net new customers. They just bought our software, and hey, you're getting training with that. Right now, we've got a project underway looking back at existing customer base, right? We've been in business 10 years. We have customers trained 7 years ago. Hey, it's time to get recertified. Or, you had 1 product, now you have 3 of our products. Why don't you get certified across our different products? So that's my story. I'm sticking to it. And this story is not about software. It's not about an LMS. It's not about a company. It's really about people and processes. And the biggest lesson that I learned is things are not always going to go as planned. You need to be able to, instead of kind of defending and putting up walls, admit there's a problem and try to fix them early. I think this was a good spot for that Chinese proverb of the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, the second best time is right now. And keep improving. I mean, feedback, I meet with the salespeople and I say, hey, how is this selling? How is that selling? What can you do with this? We've set it up so that every training module in our learning system, before you exit, it pops up a survey button. Give us, answer 5 quick questions. What'd you think about this? So that we're able to go back and use that feedback to improve things. So that concludes my presentation. Once again, thank you for your time being here with me for this hour or so. And Alec, I believe we are going to open up for questions. I think we've got about 9 minutes, 10 minutes here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Arthur. If you have a question for Arthur today, click on the question icon, type it in, and click submit. We're going to start with one, though, Arthur, from Lucy. And I know you touched on it a little bit earlier in the presentation, but Lucy's question is, how do you determine the requirements prior to selecting your vendor?
The requirements for the vendor?
Yeah, so what were your basic requirements when you were looking for a new vendor?
So now, I wasn't the person looking for that vendor when it originally started. I wasn't here yet. But from what I can figure out, they wanted a vendor who could implement quickly and implement inexpensively. So actually started out looking at some free LMSs, and then looked at some more expensive ones. And the one that the company eventually went with had at the time a sort of a quick LMS implementation program. That is one of the things that helped Imprivata actually make the decision to go with that vendor.
Okay, perfect. This next one's going to come from Elizabeth, and Elizabeth's question is, when would you recommend pursuing a new LMS instead of redeploying the current?
I think at the point where if the root cause of the problem is the technology and or the relationship with the vendor, I think I would look at someone else. When I first began looking at this, my assumption was those two things. The vendor didn't care and the system didn't do what it was supposed to do. However, once I got together with the team and we really started to dig in, we realized, you know what, it's not really the vendor's fault here. It was more the way we pushed it, the way that we failed to communicate effectively, I think, inside the organization was more of the problem. But if there are technical issues where this system that you got just doesn't work, or you just can't work with this vendor, then I would look at someone else. But I think it's really important to be honest and transparent and find out what are the root causes of the issues that you're running into.
All right, we're going to move along to the next one from Eugene. Eugene's question is, do you have any thoughts on using LMS to encourage self-directed learning?
Yeah, I mean, this is really a challenge because self-directed means motivated, right? So you need to have people who are motivated to go and learn something. If I need to figure out how to fix something, I am self-directed to go to YouTube and look up a video to see how do I do that. What I've found is that it's a challenge, internally to get employees to sometimes complete training. We often run into a challenge with customers as well. So what we've done is sort of moved away from self-directed and moved to directly directed, where you cannot move on until you complete your training. So I think it really comes down to the audience and the motivation of the audience.
All right, thank you, Arthur. This one's going to come from Jonathan. Jonathan's question is, how long did it take you to rebuild or redesign all of your content, and how much of it was outsourced as compared to your current staff today?
Yeah, so we are doing everything in-house now. And once again, most of what we're training on for customers is proprietary, admin level, real technical training. So it's hard to get folks from the outside who would understand that. So we're redesigning it using folks internally. And what we've done is really worked closely with our documentation team and with our engineering team, as well as product development and product marketing. So we're ahead of the curve on what features are coming out in the software and how does it work. So yeah, we're doing it all internally, and we really had to prioritize, starting with the most popular courses and just starting to go through that content and redesign it. To be honest with you, some of it we sort of pushed to the side. We said, you know what, this isn't even really good enough. Let's not make people go through that. And let's figure out, so for example, the prerequisite or the pre-learning, we actually renamed it pre-learning because we thought that prerequisite meant you have to know this. And so people looked at it and said, oh yeah, I know that. So it's prerequisite, so I don't have to do it. We renamed that all pre-learning. And what we did is we went through and said, what do people really, really, really need to know before they sit in the classroom? And we got it down to 9 modules. It's less than an hour. So, you know, we've really been able to kind of chunk things out like that.
All right, perfect. We have a few more minutes left. This one's going to come from Allison. Allison's question is, how do you promote your LMS to increase your employee engagement?
Well, I think one thing is what we're doing now with finding out from them what do you want, right? So we've surveyed all employees. As I mentioned, I've been sitting down with managers and talking to them about training. We also have relaunched and redesigned the employee LMS page. And our leader of human resources, our chief people officer, has been pretty much monthly sending out an email about, hey, make sure you go and you check out this or that. Any kind of new product information that's out, we're putting onto the LMS. And right now, we're, when I say sourcing, we're not having people build the training, but we're buying like some packages of, incidentally through our vendor, we're buying some packages of training based on what employees and managers have asked for. So I think it's a case of trying to understand what do people want and then getting that content in the LMS. You know, there's also the mandatory stuff, right? We're in healthcare, so we have to do HIPAA training every year. You know, and there's other mandatory training that you have to do. But at least if we get folks in there throughout the year, it's not this one time, oh, I have to go to the LMS once. So we're putting more better content in there, and that's actually increasing the percentage of employees who are accessing the Learning Center.
All right, perfect. And actually, with that point, we're going to kind of stick in that same vein. This is from Mia. Mia's question is about how many employees. How many employees are in your LMS audience?
Employees, we have 500 to 600. And on the customer side, we have about 1,200. Now, on the employee side, that's basically our whole employee base. On the customer side, it's sort of a rolling number because customers have access for a year. So at the end of a year, they're sort of dropping off. We are working to get renewals to hopefully get people to purchase more and keep renewing it, but that's been a little bit slow. So we've got about 1,200 customer folks and about, I think it's like 540 employees enrolled.
All right, perfect. I think, Arthur, that's going to be all the time we have. We only have about a minute and a half left. So thank you so much for that. We really appreciate you taking the time to present today. And I want to thank today's sponsor of this Spotlight webinar at Cornerstone OnDemand. So thank you to them. It's always a pleasure working with the folks at Cornerstone. And thank you to all of you in the audience today for your participation. We did have a lot of questions rolling through. We were unfortunately not able to get to all of them. If you could please take the time to fill out our post-event survey, which was going to appear as soon as this webinar ends. Your feedback is obviously very important to us, so please take the time to do that if you have the time. Thank you once more to Arthur, Cornerstone OnDemand, and everybody in attendance. We'll see everybody back here for our next CLO webinar that will take place on Wednesday, July 26th, and that is titled Leadership Transition Coaching, a Strategy to Foster a Positive Workplace Culture. Have a great day, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you all. Take care.